We're back with the build video for the Compass 3D Plus. We've just finished steps 3 and 4 in the manual, and there's just a few little tips and tricks that I want to point out along the way. A couple of little time-saving issues that I actually had to remove the boom one time just to get a couple of things correct that weren't 100% clear in the manual. So I just want to clarify those for you now. One of the things that pops up in the manual at the end of step 3 is that they tell you they state in the manual there are 2 grooves on the boom. The shorter groove is towards the tail while the longer one is towards the frame. Now, at the beginning of step 3, they don't have that notification. So if you get stuck straight into the building of the boom, it is not entirely clear which end needs to be facing forward, and I did it back to front. So anyways, just do be aware of that you need to make sure and orientate the boom the right direction before you start putting the tail box on, otherwise you'll have to redo it. Now the other thing that's not 100% clear in the manual, it does have a little warning box that says these bolts are used only to compress the boom, please do not screw them in completely. Now that box it's orientated next to the tail box in the manual. But what they're actually referring to is the bracket that the vertical fin mounts to. So that one is compressed around the boom. So what I've done is I've actually screwed the bolts that go into the tail case, right there, the one that goes through the vertical fin into the tail case, and the screw right there that screws into the tail case from that side. I've actually screwed those all the way in, and this one here actually goes through the tail boom, and if you just tighten it all the way down, it will force a small little hole through the tail boom, and that's what we call pinning the boom, so that the tail box cannot rotate on the boom. So tighten that all the way in. If you can actually look into the open tail box, you can see that there's no interference, doesn't interfere with the belt whatsoever. So I've tightened both of those down tightly. Now what they refer to when they say that you do not have to tighten them all the way down, which screws they're referring to is these 2 bolts here that go through the, I'll just flip this around, these 2 bolts that go through the vertical fin. That clamp has quite a bit of clearance built into it. You can see the small gap there. So the clamp does not need to be tightened all the way down to close up that gap. It's designed with that gap so that you can crank it down so it's nice and tight, but you don't want to tighten it down so far that it actually compresses the boom. So that's one of the ideas that we need to have a look at. The other thing, obviously, as we're sticking the boom in, just make sure that you seat the boom all the way home when you slide the belt through. Don't worry too much about putting these tail rod control guides on immediately, because they actually, unlike the T-Rex and some of the other models out there, they've actually got a screw that can be removed, and the things can actually be spread around the boom. So they don't have to be put on in any specific order. They can be done after the fact. So you don't have to put them on and make sure that they're on before you stick the boom into the frame, because you can put them on after the fact. Another little tip about these guides, these rod guides, tail control rod guides, is the fact that the screw, if you have the screw side, so where the screw enters the bracket, if you have it on the same side as the tail rotor, you will see that the hole underneath lines up perfectly from this front bell crank to the rear bell crank for the tail control rod. If you flip them around the other way, they don't line up as cleanly. So make sure that when you put these guides on, that you put it with the screw on the side of the tail rotor. Then you will have those lined up nice and straight. So obviously we've put the main shaft and main gear in place. So we just simply, once the boom was fully inserted, tighten up the supports for the boom supports, leave the back screws, these rear screws on the boom support bracket, leave those loose so that as you pull the boom in, this can slide freely on the boom. That's the last thing that will tighten down once we've got the distance correct for the tail belt. So what we need to do, and what we've done, is we've just simply inserted the main gear. There's also a collar that goes directly underneath the main gear. So that's what supports and locks the main. Alright guys, I just wanted to clarify something because I got cut off in that last clip, as you'll notice, by a dead battery in the camera, so it's reset now. In any case, I was talking about the lock collar that goes underneath the top bearing block. I don't know why I said it goes under the main gear, Freudian slip. But in any case, there is a lock collar that goes on the main shaft underneath the top bearing block. So the way it works is simply slide the main shaft through the bearing blocks through the main gear, put the Jesus bolt through the main gear, through the main shaft, to keep it lined up properly, and then you push down on the main gear whilst at the same time lifting up on the lock collar and tightening it down underneath that top bearing block, and that prevents the main shaft and therefore the main gear from shifting up and down in flight. So it locks it in place so it can't move up or down. So hopefully that clarifies and fixes that bit where I got cut off on that previous segment.